So beginnings of Everything. Where did you first meet? What was the first meeting?
We met over there in 2003 in Salford. I went to Salford Uni and John had already been there for a year.
Yeah.
And was already so jaded that he didn't bother to ask me if I wanted to be in a band with him. He left it to a mutual friend of ours. It's like, I've got this mate. He doesn't want to ask you to be in a band, but I want to ask you to be in his band. His songs are really good. And he gave me a CD with 10 demos on it, and it said, "The bird flu virus is on this disc." Because bird flu was big then, and it's back now. Yeah. And in many ways, that's still how he thinks and writes. And they were really good. You know, they were really ambitious songs with really ambitious backing vocal arrangements, especially, which was always part of the sound, I think, for him. And we started playing together. And then when we left university, he brought in a couple of school friends, and that was it.
And what else this was in Manchester, Salford, and area. So what else was happening around? What was the music scene like in Manchester at that point?
I think we happened to coincide with 2 or 3 other bands that were respectful, but also tired of the 70s, 80s, 90s stuff. Or at least the way in which it was remembered and conveyed in the modern era. And they were like Dutch uncles who were clearly really into a lot of the neoclassical stuff and where classical music meets King Crimson kind of stuff that we were also quite into. And we're quite technical players without being flashy about it, which we liked. And there was a band called Egyptian Hip Hop at that time as well, who were quite psychedelic, really. And they were really young as well. Yeah. They were like 17-year-olds. And there was another band called Delphic who were breaking through at that time, and that was they were a year or 2 ahead of us, and we could sort of look up to them and indeed support them at their gigs and stuff, and sort of see a pathway. So that was cool, and we did all get lumped together a little bit as a scene, because if you've got 4 bands making a noise at the same time in the same place, then the enemy will turn up and say, "Let's do a shoot in Stevenson Square," which we did do. And actually, but beyond that, it didn't really last very long, and I don't think we really changed the narrative, put it that way.
No.
But some of the music has endured.
I can't remember which year it was, but there was a Manchester International Festival. I think everyone on that scene played.
Yeah, I think that was 2009.
Yeah, possibly. And it feels like, to me, you're kind of almost survivors from that, really, and developed.
Well, Delphic didn't last. And Dutch Uncles are back now after a long hiatus, but brilliant band. But always kind of underappreciated. Didn't really break through on a national or international level. And Chip Hop didn't survive, bless him. But Alex is still playing a lot of music. And I think the more you look into it, there are more people still working in music from that time and from that scene and from that era. Loads. It was Elliot, it was the frontman of a band called Airship, and now he plays in Editors. So he's still got a really successful career.
So in those early days, what was it that bonded you together? Was it? Did you all like different things, or was it
We liked different things and the same things, and that was important, really, because we had this sort of Venn diagram where we'd all join up in the middle on the sort of staple diet stuff like the Beatles and Radiohead, and then everybody else had their own sort of specialisms. Like Mike was really adept jazz drummer and had a lot of knowledge in that area. And Alex was really into sort of psych, prog and krautrock and getting into jazz as well at that time. And John was really into the kind of R&B I found unbearable in the early 2000s. But he showed me the way with a lot of that stuff. Because the audacity of production and the lyrical dexterity and the rhythm at the forefront of everything, like Destiny's Child and stuff like that. And we did like a lot of the R&B girl groups and the way that they presented themselves, I think, and sang.
Your luck, actually.
Well, maybe not anymore. But and I was really into lots of quite bloody-minded American math rock and stuff like that. So we all kind of had our own pedigrees and put it all in the melting pot.
And those, I mean, I think you said before, all those kind of sort of influences from your teens that creep into music when you first start a band are important. Was there anything then that was unexpected that crept in? From
Yeah,
different-
I think latterly, well, firstly, I think we were as defined by the stuff that we weren't like and didn't like as much as what we did at that time. Because when you're that age, it's sort of important, I think, to define yourself as much by what you're not. And tribalism is not always a bad thing. But latterly, we got less self-conscious about being vulnerable, I think, and being a bit more open in the music and open in the lyrics, I think. So the music has got simpler, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's become more accessible exactly, but it's certainly less willfully obstructive, which for the first two, or arguably more albums, we were definitely keeping people at arm's length. It was like a deliberate thing in a way. And I'm glad that we learned some sincerity a little bit, because that's given the legacy, if I can call it that, and some emotional depth. That's how it lasts as something that people actually take to heart, not just something that people are impressed by because of its audacity or its technicality.
I think Manchester was it's always been an interesting place to make music, but it was a different place then. It's always been different through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. How did you find it? I try to remember what venues were actually open around then. Was Roadhouse still going in places like that?
Yeah, we played the Roadhouse, and we played Night and Day a lot, and we played Retro Bar a lot.
Yeah.
And those, because you could basically ask your way onto a midweek bill in any of those venues. And we were able to do that in a few other cities around the country as well. So that's sort of how we learned to play together, as much as rehearsing in our basement. But the Deaf Institute opened almost the same time that we started the band, probably 6-7 months later. I remember going to the opening do, and that became such a vital hub for touring bands that come through, that you could support and also go and watch and learn things from, and to play yourself, of course. So I think now we've started putting on gigs, having put on club nights the same year that we started the band as well. And that there was a sort of confluence of stuff happening at the same time that helped. It was sort of all mutually beneficial.
It felt like a less crowded. I think it's a very busy. I mean, you could go out and probably see 15 bands every night now.
Yeah, that's true. There are more venues now, which is not a bad thing. And we have lost a few. But I think, this place is great. And it's a great size as well, because before that, it was just the Ritz, and for that sort of size in Manchester, and it was always oversubscribed. And the Albert Hall obviously sprung up since we started as well, and Gorilla sort of come and gone and come back again.
So at what point did you realise this is happening, this is serious?
I think we were naive and idealistic enough to think that before it was, which helped, because that lasted about 3 years until we signed. And then when we signed, we actually were able to survive and pay our rent and all that. And then actually had the impetus to start making music for commercial consumption. So I suppose, I'm not sure if we ever didn't think that, in all honesty. Yeah. And it was partly because it wasn't our first rodeo totally. I mean, we didn't know anything looking back, but we thought we'd been around the block a couple of times, because John and I had been in some bands and we'd done some gigs, and I'd been in some other bands and had sort of brushes with major label funding that came to nothing. So we knew a little bit about how to be in, we knew probably more than we thought about playing and being in a band and the sort of management of that, but also a bit about the music industry, a little bit. But we quite quickly reached the limit of our knowledge and needed management, which we did get, luckily.
Each album has been, I'm trying to think of where I put it, I don't want to, cheesy, but it has had a phase. Each album's had a different phase. That's not... Has that been deliberate? Has it just happened organically?
It has been deliberate, but it's sort of something we learned, I suppose, when you've made more than one album, you realise that there's a certain rhythm to it. But also just, I think, looking at the artists we most admired, catalogue artists like Kraftwerk and David Bowie and the Beatles, who I think I've mentioned 4 times now. I don't know if you've heard of them. And bands that have an artist that went through distinct periods, really. And you can always identify any image of that with the music of that time and the artwork of that time and the album. So yeah, we have thought of the albums being in distinct periods, and that's also sort of been dictated by what we've worn on stage as well, which was sort of an accident because we just didn't look very good for a long time. And so we decided that we would just take that problem away, where we'd be arguing in the dressing room before we went on, going, "Don't wear a waistcoat. You know, you look like Aladdin." No. So we just took that problem away and said, "Well, just wear boiler suits, like we're here to do some work." And then which was, you know, obviously something we'd cribbed from Kraftwerk. Also, I guess Slipknot, it occurs to me. But also Devo and Bananarama. Devo especially. Like, if you look at Devo, they just look amazing. They've taken it to the nth degree. Yeah. It's brilliant. So we sort of wanted our own version of that, really.
Yeah.
But it was really about solving a problem, which we've now made a rod for our own back, because every time we make a record, we have to go out and think, what are we going to wear this time?
I enjoyed the white denim bleach hair period.
Yep, I didn't. No. Actually,
it looked good when it grew out, though, to be fair, Jeremy.
Yeah, well, mine took a year to grow out. But yeah, it was funny because it was just like a lot of decisions are made in our band whereby I say something, I get suggestible when we have a drink, and then next day it's like, are we actually going to do this? And John's like, well, I've already done it. And Alex goes, well, I've bought the stuff, so I'm going to do it. It's like, right, is that it then? And because I'm more than anyone, I'm a total slave to uniformity. I sort of think it has to be all or nothing, really, with this stuff. So I was the last to go, but I did bleach my hair.
It was a good move.
Thanks. Right. I think it was also quite funny that we were all like knocking 40 when we did that as well. Because I'd never done that before. Because John had been messing about with his hair his whole life. So it was a natural move for him.
Who tends to make those decisions then? Does it tend to come from...
It depends. Well, yeah, inevitably, lots of the decisions come from his vision. But really anywhere, really, I think we kind of do respect each other as equals. And I know that sounds quite sentimental and obvious, but I don't think that necessarily is the same for every artist.
No. Well, 17 years is a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to get into negative stuff because it's...
I do.
No one... Go on, let's find out what...
Yeah, go on, what's next?
But so how do you deal with... How do you keep a relationship like that going? I just need some advice for my marriage.
I'd love to, yeah. Well, it is a bit like that. How do you keep a relationship
like that going in a band? Because it's such a... Particularly, it strikes me as a band that don't take things really lightly as well. And, when it comes to what an album's going to be.
Yeah.
Particularly when it's like, societal collapse and capitalism, for example.
Which is basically what all the records are about. Yeah. I think it's a constant negotiation, so there's no real straightforward answer to your question. I think that we have... I don't know if anyone's seen that Simpsons episode where Mr. Burns is 104 and is diagnosed with having all the diseases in history in perfect balance, and that's what's kept him going. And there was similar to that, I think. There were plenty of things wrong with our dynamic, but I think it's all in the right proportions, and it just helps us to keep going. I think the fact that we have quite poor emotional memories has allowed us to keep making records, because we won't necessarily remember all the bad bits from last time. And that's actually quite it's a survival skill, that, I think. And we've all grown up a bit as well. There's less conflict overall, and I think I especially have learned to take things less heavily and less seriously, which has got to be useful. It's just, I don't know how we've done it.
No.
It's been the most significant relationship in my life. It's with 3 other men.
We could explore that, but we'll move on. So you're based at Pear Mill?
Pear Mill.
Stockport, the New Berlin, apparently.
It didn't actually catch fire. I feel bad about it. No. That was a different building in Ancoats. Yeah. That was on fire in 2020. Same day the lockdown was announced. It was a busy afternoon.
Right. That's because you're talking about really good rehearsal and so good. You don't want
so good, yeah. We had to torch the place.
But do you get around Stockport much and see what's happening
a little bit. It's quite nice what's happening. It was on the Today programme yesterday, Stockport. I don't know if you heard this. It was like an example of good town redevelopment. This is what I'm really into now. And I think, I think John lives there now, and I think he's really enjoyed being part of something that feels optimistic and resurgent.
Because I know he's there because he's not far down the road from the plaza, is he?
No, he's close.
Yeah. I'll give his address out here and go and visit him. But I just wondered if that geographical distance and not being right on top of each other all the time is something that helps keep a band.
I think it's
together, really.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. But it's also, you have to start life as a band as a kind of hive mind and live in each other's pockets, because that's how you develop who you are as a group of people and as a musical entity. And it's also inevitable because it's so busy when you're a breaking band. So we were living together, we were touring together, we were sleeping together in every sense. Well, some of them. And we weren't. We were, inevitably very, very close for that time. And then it's not a bad thing when people diversify later in life, because the trick is just to harness that stuff to the good and turn it to your advantage and put it into the work. The fact that everybody's experience is starting to splinter a bit. And of course, then, just life comes into it, marriages and mortgages and children and everything, and that pulls us in different directions, but it makes us sort of richer people in the meantime. So when we come together to make the music, it's as different people to who we were when we were 24, certainly.
And when you're writing, are you writing together at the moment, or does it tend to
We're doing everything remotely at the moment. Yeah. We are going to have to get into the same room and start playing some music soon, though. But we've learned that there's no point doing that prematurely, because we get frustrated quite quickly in that environment. So we may as well have enough to go at before we start.
And because the last album had such a strong concept, I want to say concept.
Yeah,
I think like a concept album, but it did have it had a story. You knew what it was about.
And I think in terms of overarching concept, it's the strongest, or at least the most. It's the one that's imposed itself most on the music, I think, on that record. So I think we've probably taken that approach as far as we can or should go. Yeah. It was the most sort of fantasy fiction record we've made, I think, for better or for worse. But having said that, we're all quite insistent that the music has to work in its own right. You don't need to read The Lord of the Rings to understand it. It's got to move people in every sense of the word, without needing to use your brain. Just your heart and your feet have got to work independently.
No, I thought, because I read about the album before I heard it, last one. I was like, thank God it's got good songs.
Yeah. Because we've all had that experience when you read a lot about an artist or an album, and then the music just doesn't bear it out. There are quite a lot of artists that get written about more than listened to, I think.